I'm not alone in the fact that when you travel, you come away with a different understanding of race. And that's why travel is so important. And I thought that because they were also black or people of African descent, that they would, my hope and dream is that one day we will completely. Welcome back to Anton's class. I'm very happy you decided to join me here this evening. I worked today, and so I am a little bit tired, but not tired enough to not record. So let's go ahead and make a video talking about race and the illusion of race. So the reason I wanted to talk about this topic is for a few reasons. The first reason being that on one of my previous videos about Tyla, I had mentioned that race is an illusion, that it is a social construct, and that it is not a biological phenomenon.
Humans seem really different, but on a DNA level, we're remarkably similar. Groups of chimps in Central Africa living right next to each other show more genetic variation than we find in the entire human population.
I had a few comments tell me that they disagreed and that race was real and that they could observe that there are different races. Well, I'm here to let you guys know that your eyes are deceiving you because while we may look different in appearance and phenotype, there are no biological races. Race doesn't exist in ultimate reality. Race is not a biological or scientific reality, okay? It is a social construct. Please watch this video to the end, by the way, because I'm going to be exploring this concept in more depth, all right? And so some people like to comment and be like, Anton, guess what? I know you're saying race is fake, but I experience racism. Okay, we're going to discuss that later on in the video. But right now, let's talk about the fact that race is an illusion, okay? So, like I said, in one of my previous videos, I had discussed race. And so if you haven't seen that video, you can go ahead and check it out. But in biology, race is not real. What does that mean? It means that there's not enough genetic variability within the human species to be able to classify us as different and distinct races. The same does not hold true for other species on this planet. For example, Canada geese. There's enough genetic variability within Canada geese, even though they look similar, there's enough genetic variability within that species to be able to classify them as different and distinct races or subspecies. Race could be thought of as subspecies, okay? And within the human race, within the human species Homo sapiens, we are the same species and subspecies. Every human being alive today is part of the same species and subspecies. That's why we're called Homo sapiens sapiens. That means we are all part of the same species and subspecies. There's not enough genetic variability within this beautiful human species.
Girl, you know you fine.
Classify us as different.
Oh yeah, I know I'm fine. Just eat your cereal, leave me alone.
That ethnicity doesn't exist or that culture doesn't exist, because those things do exist, right? And there is a lot of diversity in our physical appearance. Why is that? Because we had to adapt to different climates. We had to adapt to different experiences, right? We have human beings. We colonized the entire planet. There are human beings that adapted to the grasslands. There are human beings that adapted to deserts. Human beings that adapted to life in the Arctic, right? Life in Northern Europe, life in the Mediterranean. Human beings had to adapt to different environments. Just to give you a little bit of background information, I sort of was brought up with the understanding that race was an illusion. My family did a good job, especially my father. He really taught us that race was not in fact real, that it was an illusion. But he also taught us that race played a very real part in the way our society functions, unfortunately. Okay? It's part of the unfortunate reality of being human, especially in American society, right? Race does factor into the way our society was created, the way it was founded, and the way it was structured. And my father taught me that while race wasn't real and that we should operate from that understanding, that we were going to have to navigate this world as people considered black. And my father brought us up with that depth of understanding. He also taught us that unfortunately, there was mental illness called racism and that we would experience it. The reason he even had to bring that up was because in first grade, I went to school and a kid called me the N-word. And I came home and I asked my dad, "Hey, Dad, what does this word mean?" And he said, "Oh, I was hoping I would not have to have this conversation, son." And then he proceeded to explain to me the history of that word for my first grade understanding and why it was a horrible word and why people shouldn't use it, but that I should have a depth of understanding that those people were suffering from a level of mental illness and mental instability, and that I should have a level of compassion for them. I know that's going to be triggering to some people because some people are like, "No, I'm tired of us having compassion on people who are racist." I'm just sharing with you what my father taught me, and I do appreciate that because I got to grow up and see it as a mental illness that they were struggling with, and that could be overcome. And that is in fact true. Some people who are brought up racist can overcome that. I also eventually as an adult believed that skin folk were kinfolk, that all skin folk were kinfolk, okay? If you don't know, I traveled to Africa and I lived there. I went to Rwanda first. That's the first country that I moved to. And sort of in my naivete, I flew to Rwanda and I thought that because they were also black or people of African descent, that they would welcome me home as a brother and that skinfolk were kinfolk and that somehow I would fit in. Now, like I said, I know that was very naive because Africa is not a monolith. Black people are not a monolith. And there's really no such thing as black people. That was a concept created and enforced upon us by white people, okay? Which we'll get into. But I went to Rwanda with that idea. And when I landed in Rwanda, I realized pretty quickly that all skin folk ain't kinfolk and that we are just all different. And it doesn't matter if someone's considered black. They were different people than me. This concept of black doesn't exist there. They identify by language and culture, which makes sense. So if you speak the same language and you're of the same culture, you are one of them. If you don't speak the same language and you're not of the same culture, then you're an outsider. That's how most of the world operates, right? But in America, because our society was structured on this false idea, this matrix of racial categories, white, black, red, as they used to call it, yellow, which was Asian, we have a different understanding. So in my naivete, I arrived in Africa with that same concept of race. And that concept was shattered, and I realized pretty quickly, just because I thought we were all black, that is certainly not the case. They are Rwandese or Rwandan, and I am American. So then nationality and culture and language played a way more impactful role in my experience in Rwanda than my so-called race, which doesn't exist there in that way, right? Eventually, I traveled to Namibia, and there are more people who look like me there. In Rwanda, they look quite different, so they were able to identify me as a foreigner just from my appearance alone. In Namibia, there were a lot of people who looked more like me, so they assumed I was Namibian. And they have a similar history in regards to race in Namibia because they were subjugated by racial ideology and during the apartheid and during the white South African rule of Namibia. And it's just like South Africa, right, with apartheid. So in Namibia and South Africa, they did say, "Welcome home, brother," and I did fit in more, okay? So I did feel like I was at home to an extent. However, I will say that the longer I was in Namibia, the longer I realized that I was not Namibian. And it didn't matter if we were all black, right? They identified as tribe because they spoke Oshabambo or Koekoegoab, I believe is what it's called, or Caprivian or Himba or Herero, right? Oshi Herero. They spoke languages and they had a culture that I wasn't familiar with too much, and languages that I didn't speak. So I realized, I'm not Namibian, and that's okay. There's a lot of diversity and beauty in the human experience. And the idea of race in America is It's an idea. It's a cultural phenomena. It's not real and ultimate reality. And I want us to operate within that understanding. All right? So race is not real and ultimate reality. It is not a biological fact. It is not a scientific fact. But, and this is for part 2 of this video, which we're going to get into, it is a social reality. So let's go ahead and talk about that. All right? And by the way, I want you guys to pause the video and comment what have been some of your experiences with the idea of race. When you traveled abroad, didn't you see that the way that they interact with you is different? And didn't you guys also sort of have your minds blown? Maybe you didn't, but I know I'm not alone in the fact that when you travel, you come away with a different understanding of race. And that's why travel is so important. That's why stepping outside of your comfort zone is so important. That's why experiencing different cultures is so important. All right, so while race is in fact not real in ultimate reality or in biology, we cannot deny the fact that race exists socially. It is a social construct. It is a cultural construct. It's a social phenomena. What does that mean? When you hear people say that, what does that mean? It means that the way we've decided to structure our world is based on race. When I see our world, I'm referring largely to America and the Western civilization or within Western society, because race does differ and the concept of race differs completely depending on where you go in the world, all right? But in America and in the American context and in Western cultures, we've decided to structure our culture and we've decided to create this matrix that is based on the reality of race. So what does that mean? It means that our institutions were founded on the idea of race and racism. It means that people, when they interact with other human beings, they oftentimes make judgments and they have preconceived notions about people based on their race. And a lot of times there are stereotypes and certain associations with different races and racial categorizations, right? The reason I'm using air quotes a lot is because these concepts, like I said, are not real and ultimate reality. And unfortunately, the way we navigate the world is in a racial way. My hope and dream is that one day we will completely move beyond the concept and the idea of race, okay? Because again, in ultimate reality, it doesn't exist. We are biologically very similar as a species, right? And we all know, and we've all had this experience, all skin folk ain't kinfolk. And sometimes you become super close or open, or you have way more in common with someone who looks absolutely nothing like you, right? There's so much more to being human than our physical appearance. And unfortunately, we're oftentimes reduced to our physical appearance. Our physical appearance is but an outfit, right? Like I said, we are adapted to different environments. Our ancestors were adapted to different environments. They were in isolation for a while. So they started to look different, okay? They started to speak different languages. But ultimately, we are all human. We are all part of the same race. And my hope and dream is that one day we can move beyond that. I would love to encourage you guys to do your own research about this topic. And I would love to encourage you guys to open up dialogue about these concepts. It is vitally important. And I would also love to encourage you above all else to have compassion and love for your fellow human beings, regardless of their physical appearance, all right? Navigate this world with the understanding and with the knowledge that we are all the same race. We are all the same species and subspecies, right? You could also navigate the world with the understanding that while that is true, everyone doesn't understand that, and people unfortunately still operate within the racial paradigm. All right, it is a paradigm. And my hope is that videos like this and information like this will help us all to have that necessary paradigm shift. A shift from the understanding or the belief that we are all different races and that race exists, to the reality, the real paradigm, the awakening that race is an illusion. It doesn't matter what people's physical appearance is at the end of the day. Our physical appearance is an outfit. Some people put on an outfit for Africa, like my ancestors. Some of my ancestors. Some people put on an outfit for Asia, like some of my other ancestors, right? Some people put on outfits to adapt to the Arctic, like the Inuit people. But at the end of the day, we're all human and we all share this human experience and we all share this planet together. So I would love to encourage you guys to read up on this concept. Don't take my word for it, right? Read up on it, do some research, and let me know in the comments, all right? If you disagree, that's perfectly fine, but let's disagree respectfully and as adults. Thank you so much for stopping by Anton's class. Until next time, goodbye.